All right, and good afternoon and welcome to the second part of this briefing. Today is World Population Day. In his message, the Secretary General said that when we act on our shared values, we contribute to our common future. He called on all to work together toward greater equality and solidarity to ensure that our planet can support our needs and those of future generations. And on this day, we're very fortunate to have with us three speakers to talk to you about World Populations Prospect 2022 Summary of Results, the annual report on population that we present. We'll first hear from Maria-Francesca Spatolisano, the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And then after that, you'll hear from John Wilmoth, Director of the UN Population Division in DESA, and then Patrick Gerland, the Chief of the Population Estimates and Projections Section. So first, the floor is yours, Ms. Spatolisano.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you on World Population Day. This day was established by the United Nations to focus the world attention on the urgency and importance of population issues. Today, our department, DESA, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, is releasing a report, the World Population Prospects 2022 Summary of Results. The title is intentionally factual, but the findings are quite exciting news. The report provides an overview of global population trends. It focuses on the 100-year period between 1950 and 2050, underpinned by analysis of historical demographic trends. But it also presents population projections to the year 2100, reflecting a range of plausible outcomes at the global, regional, and national level. And I will show you the report. It looks like this. The report is accompanied by a data set, the World Population Prospects 2022, which is the 27th edition of the United Nations Estimates and Projections of the Global Population, a series that began in 1951. The WPP dataset and report are some of the most downloaded products of UN DESA. Timely and accurate estimates and projections of population trends are critical for anticipating future demographic trends in support of national development planning. The WPP dataset also provides inputs for the calculation of numerous development indicators used by the United Nations system, including for about 1/4 of the indicators used for the global monitoring of progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, 1/4 of all the indicators. Ladies and gentlemen, on 15 November 2022, the world will mark an important milestone as the global population surpasses 8 billion people. 8 billion people, what a number. The historic moment calls for celebration. Population growth is a tangible sign of our collective success in improving the living conditions of everyday people throughout the world. But the 8 billion milestone also brings important responsibilities and highlights related challenges for social and economic development and environmental sustainability. For example, countries whose populations are growing rapidly must provide schooling and healthcare to growing numbers of children and ensure education and employment opportunities to increasing numbers of youth. Lowering the fertility rate reduces the rate of population increase at younger age, while having fewer children per adult makes it easier to improve the quality of education for each individual child. Countries where population growth has slowed or stopped must prepare for an increasing proportion of older persons and in some cases a decreasing population size. Whereas population growth may exacerbate environmental damage, more developed countries, whose per capita consumption of material resources is generally the highest, bear the greatest responsibility for implementing strategies to decouple human economic activity from environmental degradation. Ladies and gentlemen, the report, dataset, and other outputs of the World Population Prospects are widely used by the member states, the United Nations system, academia, the private sector, and civil society. The report, the WPP, helps to promote demographic foresight and is an important tool for longer-term and intergenerational thinking, as called for by the Secretary General in his report on our common agenda. Let me now pass the floor to my colleague, Mr. John Wilmoth, who is the Director of the Population Division in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, for more in-depth presentation of the report, and I thank you for your attention. Please.
Thank you, Francesca. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. World Population Prospects is the largest recurrent project of the Population Division. The 2022 edition, which we are launching today, is based on data from more than 1,750 national population censuses, almost 2,900 sample surveys, and information from civil registration and vital statistics systems for 169 countries. The new report is being released amidst a global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Even though the evidence remains incomplete at this moment, World Population Prospects 2022 reflects the impact of the pandemic in its estimates of mortality, fertility, and migration for 2020 and 2021, and in its projected trends starting in 2022. For the first time, the 2022 edition of the World Population Prospects presents all demographic indicators from 1950 to 2100 in one-year intervals of age and time, instead of the 5-year intervals we used previously. This greater level of precision allows for more accurate monitoring and analysis of the linkages between population trends and indicators of sustainable development. There is an inherent uncertainty in population projections. This uncertainty depends on the plausible range of future trajectories of mortality, fertility, and international migration, which have been assessed for each country or area using demographic and statistical methods. The projections typically become more uncertain over time. An assessment of this uncertainty is included in all our analyses in the form of prediction intervals, which represent the plausible range of future trajectories of population size and other indicators. Ladies and gentlemen, the global population will continue to grow and could reach 9.7 billion in 2050. It is projected to reach a peak of around 10.4 billion people during the 2080s and to remain at that level until 2100. The projected global population of 10.4 billion at the end of the century is more than 500 million lower than what we projected 3 years ago. This difference is due mainly to a downward revision of recent population estimates for China and to changes in estimated and projected levels of fertility for China and Nigeria in the recent past and near future. We currently project that India will surpass China to become the world's most populous nation as early as next year, or 2023. Other salient findings of the report include the following 10 key messages. Number one, the world's population continues to grow, but the pace of growth is slowing down. Number two, even though policies to reduce fertility will have little immediate impact on the pace of global population growth, their cumulative effect can significantly reduce global population growth after 2050. Global population growth presents challenges to achieving sustainable development. In turn, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those related to health, education, and gender equality, is likely to hasten the transition towards lower fertility. That was number 3. Number 4, while life expectancy continues to increase globally, large disparities between countries continue to exist. Number 5, a rising share of the population in the working ages, currently observed in most of sub-Saharan Africa as well as in parts of Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean, can help boost economic growth per capita. This is the so-called demographic dividend. Number 6, the population of older persons is increasing, both in numbers and as a share of the total population. Number 7, more and more countries are beginning to experience population decline. Number 8, international migration is having important impacts on population trends for some countries. Over the next few decades, migration will be the sole driver of population growth in high-income countries. Number 9, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all 3 components of population change. For example, global life expectancy at birth fell to 71.0 years in 2021, down from 72.8 in 2019, due mostly to the impact of COVID-19. Number 10, the COVID-19 pandemic has also interrupted many data collection operations, including the 2020 round of population censuses. Dear colleagues, the 2022 edition of the World Population Prospects has benefited from a major technical and methodological upgrade. The new version provides more detailed data, as mentioned earlier, as well as greater transparency concerning the methods applied and the data used to update national-level population estimates and projections. In closing, I wish to thank and congratulate Mr. Patrick Gerland, who led the technical work in preparing the 2022 edition of World Population Prospects. I'd also like to thank Mr. Victor Gagbe-Togbe and Mr. Pablo Lattes, who led specific aspects of this work, as well as all members of the WPP team and other colleagues in the Population Division who contributed their time, skills, and expertise to complete a major upgrade of this important data set and its entire production system. We would welcome any questions that you may wish to ask. Thank you.
Mr. Gerland, do you have any remarks at all? All right, let's turn over the floor to questions. Edie?
Thank you very much. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you very much for doing this briefing on this important subject. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I have 2 questions. My first question is, you've picked November 15th as the date that the 8 billionth baby will be born. How certain are you of that date, and how did you reach that? And my second question is, you've mentioned, and the report mentions, that the population of India is going to surpass the population of China in 2023. How certain is that, and what do you see as the impact of that going into the future? Thank you.
All right. I will answer, and maybe Patrick will add something, but that is based on our calculations. It's not fudged in any way. It is exactly the date when our projected line crosses 8 billion. That is the date. It happened to be on November 15th this year. How certain are we about that? We think there's a lot of uncertainty around the date. We do not pretend that that's the actual date when we will surpass 8 billion people. But, and we think that the uncertainty is at least plus or minus a year. So we really don't know exactly when the global population is surpassing 8 billion. It could have been, it could have already happened. It could happen next year, but it's around this time, around November plus or minus a year or more. As far as certainty goes. Population of India and China, again, we don't know very well the exact date. There's uncertainty involved in all of that. In fact, there's probably more uncertainty in this case than in the case of the global population passing 8 billion. Just because when you add more things together, you kind of, errors cancel out, let's say. So there's a lot of uncertainty about when that will actually happen. It's been foreseen for a long time that this would happen. However, we've moved the date forward somewhat. The previous edition of this work, we projected that the crossover would happen in 2027. Now it's moved forward a little bit for some of the same reasons that I mentioned earlier about the changes, updates to the data about China. As far as the significance, I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that. What is the significance of being the largest population in the world? I think you have certain claims on things. I wonder what will happen in terms of the discussion around, roles at the UN and the roles of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council. If India becomes the largest country, they may think that that's gives them a claim. That they should be part. They've been claiming that they should be part of that group anyway. So yeah, but it may strengthen their claim, for example. As far as the development implications, I think it's significant to note that China's reduction of population size happened in a more drastic way. They implemented policies in the 1970s and 80s that were very effective in reducing the fertility level. And that led to very sharp changes in population. It slowed the growth very rapidly. It also inverted the age distribution. And now they're concerned in China about the top-heavy, the nature of the age distribution, more and more older people relative to the rest of the population. India had a much smoother transition. It brought the fertility rate down more slowly. That means there aren't these same kind of discontinuities in the historical patterns, and there hasn't been the same very rapid aging of the population. Although aging will come there as well, but it will be a more gradual process. And in some ways, that may be better to manage, a better circumstance in the long run for the economy to have that kind of more gradual demographic change than the very rapid change that's happened in China. I don't know if Patrick wants to add anything to those comments.
Just related to the India-China story. China was able to conduct their census in 2020 like they have been doing every 10 years. India was planning to do their census in 2021, but because of the pandemic, it got postponed. So once India is able to do their next census and the new information will become available, we will be able to take advantage of this extra information to reassess.
Just before we
Did
conclude.
did China do their census in 2020?
And let me add about aging that our next report, the World Social Report, will be indeed an analysis of aging population. So look forward for that one too.
Floor? Any of the guests in our virtual chat room, if you have a question, please unmute now. Yes, please, Arul.
This is regarding reports of the population replacement rate in India. That's the number of children per woman coming down below 2.2. How soon do you think it's going to happen? And has that been taken into account in the report?
I believe it's already happened, but Patrick will confirm.
Related to this topic of replacement of generations, in principle in India, the situation in recent years is very close to this situation. And the most recent fertility survey of India is pretty much suggesting that this is already the case. So when we do this assessment and these projections for the future generations, we try to take into account all of these recent changes. And if you look at our results, you can see that we predict for India basically a continuation of those recent trends. Over.
Any other questions? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Please, take the floor.
Me?
Hi, sorry,
Pamela
good
Hall,
afternoon.
CBS, thank you.
Okay. All right,
I'm
Pam,
sorry,
and Pam,
would you-
and then you go. Yes, sorry. Go ahead, Pam.
Oh, okay, sorry, got called on. Okay, one of the report conclusions is that some of the increase came from increasing urbanization and migration. Can you please explain how migration has increased population, or has it just shifted population from one country to another? Thank you.
Hello, Pam. Yes, certainly it's just shifting people around. It doesn't affect the growth of the global population at all, unless we're sending people into space and so forth. But so it affects the growth, though, of certain national populations. And in fact, for high-income countries in recent years, migration has become the major component of growth. And moving forward, it will be the only driver of growth because the balance of births minus deaths will become negative overall in Europe. And so the only driver of growth will be immigration.
All right, and the change, you said, I'm sorry, as a follow-up, you said I grew driven by major changes in fertility rates. Does that mean that India outpacing China has higher fertility rates? Thank you.
Yes, India has generally had a higher fertility rate than China, and that's why it has slowly caught up in terms of population and is now poised to overtake India.
Ephraim?
Thank you, and thank you all for the briefing.
Yes, Ephraim.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Yang Lei here from Eco Business in Singapore. Just two questions for me. First one is, how has climate change affected the carrying capacity on Earth and for humans? Is the current growth trajectory of peaking at 10.4 billion people in 2080s, is it sustainable? And secondly, I just want to ask, you mentioned that population growth will now be mostly in lower income countries. How do you expect that trend to influence the narrative around loss and damage financing for climate risks? Thank you.
I didn't hear the last part.
Right, sorry. So the second question is, the report mentioned that population growth will now be mostly in lower income countries. I mean, that's a trend for a while. But I'm just wondering, how do you expect that trend to influence the narrative around loss and damage financing in terms of climate change and climate risks?
Loss and damage?
Loss and damage financing, I think he said, and
Yes,
climate
yeah.
risks.
It's a request of the developing world
Yeah.
to compensate.
Well, maybe you can answer that one. Let me start with how has climate change altered carrying capacity? I would say we don't have a good answer to that question. We do not explicitly take that into account in our projections because there's really no well-established basis for doing that. Does climate change alter the carrying capacity? I mean, there's no really obvious reason why that would be the case, that it would alter the carrying capacity fundamentally. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in terms of agricultural lands, for example. They may move, but does that mean that they will become overall less productive and that we're less capable of producing food for the planet? I don't know that there's evidence of that. So I don't know that it really fundamentally changes the carrying capacity. We haven't taken that into account in our projections. But the second part, maybe Maria-Francesca, you would like to answer.
Well, I won't go specifically into that, but let's say that, as I said in the presentation, we believe that it's possible to decouple human economic activity from environmental degradation. But of course, that requires a lot of effort at the individual and the global level. And therefore, it's not automatically true that more people means more environmental degradation. And there are different approaches, we are all aware, in different countries about who should shoulder the burden. But I think it's true that those who emit the most should make the biggest effort, but it is also true that those who do not necessarily emit per capita that much yet should be aware that the purpose is not to emit more, but to grow and develop more in a sustainable way. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Ephraim Kusaivi?
Thank you. And maybe just a follow-up. Sorry, just maybe a quick follow-up to the second question. I'm just wondering, what are the most important actions then for the global community to take to ensure the well-being of these future generations who may be in lower-income countries? That's all from me. Thank you.
Well, achieve the goals. I would say that member states have laid out a very comprehensive plan for achieving sustainable development, and that's the guidebook, I think, as far as what needs to be done. I mean, from our perspective with population change and what really matters, it's education, health, healthcare, and gender equality are probably, if we achieve those three SDGs, then likely, fertility rates will continue to fall in countries where growth is currently very rapid, and the kinds of changes that we've seen in other countries will kind of finish spreading across the world. So it's very closely tied to achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know if others have anything to add. Okay.
Ephraim?
Thank you so much for this briefing. A quick follow-up on the migration becoming at some point the sole source of growth in high-income countries. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And specifically, how does it square with what Ms. Spatolisano said in her introductory remarks about population growth being a sign of human advancement and an improvement of life standards, if in those high-income countries only migration will be the source of growth at some point?
I think the way to understand what the Assistant Secretary General was saying was that when we see the global growth, the growth of the global population that has taken place, fundamentally that is caused by lowering the death rate. That the reason that the global population has grown as much as it has over the last 3 centuries is that we've reduced the death rate, we've increased life expectancy at birth. Children are much more likely to survive from birth to adulthood and to have families of their own. So in that sense, population growth reflects our progress in improving survival rates and is fundamentally a good thing. It's a sign of our success as a species that we have learned to resist the elements and to survive longer on average than ever had been the case in the past. So then I guess the situation now in high-income countries where we wouldn't quite see it, I guess, the same way that, we wouldn't focus on the same issues as far as how we define success of the country. The growth, at that point, the lack of growth is in some ways due to the very low levels of fertility. Those countries have achieved high levels of life expectancy. We're talking, say, about European countries, Japan, North America, Australia, New Zealand, very high levels of life expectancy. But now what is causing the absence of growth or the tendency toward decline even in size has to do with very low levels of fertility, where the total fertility, lifetime fertility for a woman has fallen in many cases below 1.5 births, in some cases even much lower than that. And that is driving the population, the tendency toward rapid population aging and eventually even potential decline. It's the very low birth rate. So I guess it's kind of addressing 2 different things. I don't think it's really a contradiction, but it's the very low birth rate in high-income countries that is causing a situation where growth will not happen because of any excess of births over deaths. The births will actually be less numerous than the deaths, and so populations are starting to decline in Europe just on that basis. But it's the positive migration flows of people into the country that are keeping the growth positive. I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to add on those questions. Patrick? Yeah.
Just a small complement is if you look at the results, especially when we go as far up to the end of the century, you need to think of basically the next 2 to 3 generations. What would be the number of children that basically the next 2 to 3 generations in the future will have on average. So as you go further and further into the future, the more it's uncertain. And based on past historical records, there are very few human societies that disappears. Human societies adapt, and the question in that case, within 1 generation, 2 generations, for those countries that experience these situations, do people change their attitude, their behavior in terms of reproductive health, in terms of reproductive choice, in terms of family norms? So there are a lot of possible futures. And if you look at our results, you will find basically that we are not just projecting one possible future, but a range of possibilities and their implications.
And with that, I would like once more to thank our guests, Maria-Francesca Spatolisano, John Wilmoth, and Patrick Gerland. Thanks very much, and have a good afternoon, everyone.